What if the name of a false god, worshipped thousands of years ago, is still being spoken today, not as a relic of the past, but as a warning that has never expired? What if entire civilizations once built their lives around something that could not even move, could not respond, could not save them, yet they feared it, trusted it, and sacrificed for it as if their survival depended on it? And what if the same pattern, the same mindset, still exists today, just hidden beneath different names and different forms? Before we go deeper, take a moment and become part of this journey. Thank you for being here with Islamic Insight Channel. It truly means something that you chose to spend these moments seeking knowledge. Let me know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you feel connected to this kind of content, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because what you are about to hear is not just history, it is a mirror. Long before the message of Islam reached the world through Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, there were lands where people lived in constant dependence on forces they believed controlled nature. In those regions, especially across ancient Sham, people looked to the sky with a mixture of hope and fear, because rain meant survival and drought meant destruction. Crops would either grow or wither, livestock would either thrive or die, and entire communities could collapse within a single season if the skies remained closed. In that fragile reality, people began to attach their hopes to something they could see and control, something they could shape with their own hands, and from that need, Baal emerged as one of the central figures of worship. They carved statues, raised altars, and created rituals, believing that this figure held authority over rain, fertility, and the rhythm of life itself. It was not just belief, it became identity. It shaped how they lived, how they made decisions, how they understood the world around them. What is striking is not just that they worshipped Baal, but how deeply that worship was woven into their existence. It was not a casual belief that sat on the side of their lives. It was central. When the clouds gathered, they attributed it to Baal. When the rain fell, they thanked Baal. When drought struck, they feared they had angered Baal. This created a cycle where every natural event reinforced their belief, even though Islam teaches clearly that these signs are from Allah alone. The Quran repeatedly reminds humanity that it is Allah who sends down rain from the sky, who revives the earth after its death, who provides without limit. Yet these people turned away from that truth and placed their trust in something that had no power at all. This is where the danger lies. Not just in the act of worship itself, but in how easily human beings can convince themselves of something simply because it feels familiar, because it has been passed down, because everyone around them believes it. Into this environment, into a society that was fully immersed in this system of belief, Allah sent a man with a message that would shake the very foundation of everything they thought was true. That man was Prophet Ilyas. Peace be upon him. He was not sent to a neutral audience. He was sent to people whose lives were built around Baal, whose traditions were tied to it, whose leaders benefited from it, and whose fears were anchored in it. When he spoke, he was not just offering a new idea, he was challenging their entire worldview. The Quran preserves a moment from his call, a moment that carries incredible weight, when he asks them directly why they call upon Baal and abandon the best of creators. This question is not just rhetorical, it is surgical. It exposes the contradiction they were living in. They were turning away from the one who created them, the one who sustains them, the one who controls everything they feared and hoped for, and instead directing their devotion towards something they themselves had shaped. Imagine standing in front of your own people, knowing that what you are about to say will not be welcomed, knowing that it will threaten their traditions, their sense of security, and their identity, yet still speaking with clarity and certainty. This is what the prophets did. They did not soften the truth to make it easier to accept. They delivered it as it was, with wisdom, but without compromise. Prophet Ilyas called his people back to something pure and simple, the worship of Allah alone, without partners, without intermediaries, without illusions. But the reality is that when people are deeply attached to something, especially when it has been normalized for generations, they do not let go easily. The call of Ilyas was not just heard, it was resisted. Not because it lacked truth, but because it demanded change. And this is where the story becomes more than just a historical account. It reveals something about human nature that does not change across time. People are not always guided by what is true. They are often guided by what is comfortable, what is familiar, what protects their current way of life. The people of Baal were not unaware. They were confronted with a clear message, a direct question, a call to reflect. Yet most of them chose to hold on to what they knew. This is why the Quran does not simply mention these stories as past events. It presents them as lessons, as living examples, as warnings that remain relevant long after the statues have been broken and the temples have turned to dust. Because when you strip away the names, when you remove the specific forms, the core issue remains the same. Who do you trust? Who do you rely on? Who do you turn to when everything feels uncertain? The people of Baal answered that question in a way that led them away from Allah. Prophet Ilyas came to redirect that answer, to bring them back to the one who never fails, the one who controls the rain they were so desperate for, the one who had always been sustaining them even while they were attributing that sustenance to something else. And that tension, that struggle between truth and illusion, between guidance and misguidance, is not locked in the past. It continues in different forms in every generation. What made the situation even more striking was not just that people believed in Baal, but that they were absolutely convinced of his power, despite the complete absence of any real evidence. They stood before carved figures made of stone or wood, shaped by human hands, lifted into place by human effort, and maintained by human care. Yet they attributed to them control over the sky, the rain, and the earth itself. This is where the Quran draws a sharp line, not just to reject idol worship, but to expose the illusion behind it. These objects had no life within them, no awareness, no ability to respond, yet they were treated as if they held the keys to survival. It is not just disbelief, it is a complete reversal of reality, where the powerless is seen as powerful, and the all-powerful is ignored. Islam repeatedly challenges this way of thinking by directing attention back to what is undeniable. Who sends the rain that falls from the sky in perfect measure? Who revives dry, lifeless land and turns it into fields of green? Who sustains creation in ways that no human being can fully grasp or control? The Quran calls people to reflect on these signs, not in an abstract way, but in a way that forces a person to confront the truth directly. The people of Baal were witnessing these signs every day. They saw the clouds gather, they saw the earth respond to rain, they saw life emerge from what appeared dead. Yet they chose to connect all of this to something that had no connection to it at all. This is the depth of illusion that can take hold when a false belief becomes deeply rooted, and once that illusion settles in, it does not remain a simple misunderstanding. It becomes defended, it becomes protected, it becomes part of identity. This is why when Prophet Ilyas, peace be upon him, called his people back to Allah, the resistance was not mild or passive. It was firm, emotional, and in many cases, hostile. Because his message did not just question Baal, it dismantled everything that had been built around Baal. It challenged leaders who held influence through this system. It challenged traditions that had been passed down for generations. It challenged a sense of security that people had grown dependent on, even if that security was based on something false. People often think that rejecting truth is simply about ignorance, but the Quran shows that it is often much deeper than that. It is about attachment. It is about pride. It is about the fear of losing what is familiar. The people of Ilyas were not lacking intelligence. They were lacking the willingness to let go. And when truth requires a person to change, to admit they were wrong, to break away from what everyone around them accepts, it becomes heavy. It becomes uncomfortable. This is why many of them chose to remain where they were, even after the message had been made clear. There is a pattern here that repeats across the stories of the prophets. The truth is presented with clarity, but only a small group responds to it sincerely. The majority hesitate, resist, or reject it entirely. Not because the truth is hidden, but because accepting it comes at a cost. It demands humility, it demands courage, it demands a willingness to stand apart from what is normal. And for many people, that is a price they are not ready to pay. So they hold on to what they know, even if it is built on illusion. The Quran indicates that only a select group followed Prophet Ilyas, peace be upon him. These were the ones who were able to see beyond the surface, who were able to recognize that what they had inherited was not necessarily what was true. They broke away from the majority, and in doing so, they aligned themselves with the message that all prophets brought, the message of pure monotheism, the worship of Allah alone without any partners. This choice was not easy. It likely came with social pressure, isolation, and even danger. But it was the path of truth, and that is what distinguished them. As for those who continued in their rejection, the Quran does not leave their story without consequence. While it does not go into detailed narrative descriptions of their end, it makes it clear that rejection of clear guidance is not something without accountability. Every nation that turned away after truth was made evident faced the result of that choice, whether in this world or the next. The story of the people of Baal becomes part of this broader pattern, a reminder that falsehood can persist for a time, it can dominate, it can appear strong and deeply rooted, but it does not last. This is one of the most important lessons to take from this account. False beliefs often gain strength not because they are true, but because they are supported by habit, by culture, by repetition, and by fear of change. They can spread across entire societies, shaping how people think and live, making it seem as though they are unquestionable. But when examined closely, they often collapse under the simplest reflection. What power does this thing actually have? Can it create? Can it sustain? Can it respond? The idols of Baal could do none of these things, yet they were elevated to a position they did not deserve. The Quran brings this lesson forward again and again, not to simply criticize past nations, but to train the mind to think clearly and honestly. It invites reflection, not blind acceptance. It encourages a person to question what they follow and why they follow it. Because guidance is not just about receiving information, it is about recognizing truth when it is presented and having the strength to accept it. The consequence of false worship is not limited to punishment alone. It also distorts a person's understanding of reality. When someone places their trust in something that has no power, they are left vulnerable. Their hopes are misplaced, their fears are misdirected, and their connection to the one who truly controls everything is weakened. This creates a deeper loss, one that goes beyond the physical. It affects the heart, the clarity of thought, and the ability to recognize truth. This is why the message of Prophet Ilyas, peace be upon him, was so crucial. It was not just about rejecting Baal, it was about restoring a correct understanding of who Allah is and what it means to rely on him. It was about realigning people with reality itself, where the Creator is recognized as the source of all power, all provision, and all control. It was a call to break free from illusion and return to something solid, something unchanging, something true. And even though the people of Baal lived long before our time, the lesson remains just as relevant. The forms of falsehood may change, the names may disappear, but the underlying pattern does not. People still place trust in things that cannot truly benefit them. They still fear losing things that have no real control over their destiny. They still resist change when truth challenges what they are used to. This is why the Quran preserves these stories, not as distant history, but as living guidance. It is a reminder that the struggle between truth and illusion is not confined to one era. It is ongoing, and every person is part of it, whether they realize it or not. What makes the mention of Baal even more powerful is that it is not buried in obscure history or left to be discovered through archaeological ruins alone. It is named directly in the Quran, preserved with precision, placed within a question that cuts through centuries of human behavior. When Allah recounts the words of Prophet Ilyas, peace be upon him, asking his people why they call upon Baal and abandon the best of creators, it is not simply a record of a past conversation. It is a statement that carries weight in every era. The Quran does not casually mention names. When a specific figure like Baal is brought forward, it is because that figure represents something far greater than a single moment in time. It represents a pattern of deviation, a clear example of how human beings can turn away from what is obvious and choose something that holds no real power. This moment in the Quran invites reflection in a very direct way. It forces a person to pause and consider the contrast being presented. On one side, there is Baal, a creation shaped by human hands, dependent on people for its existence, unable to act, unable to respond, unable to control anything. On the other side, there is Allah, the creator of everything, the one who brings life and causes death, the one who controls the skies, the earth, and everything in between. The question is not complicated, but it is deeply confronting. Why would anyone choose the first over the second? Why would anyone abandon the source of all power and turn to something that has none? This is the kind of question that does not just apply to the people of Ilyas. It applies to every person who hears it. And this is where the story begins to move beyond history and into something that feels much closer, much more immediate. The name Baal may belong to an ancient world, but what it represents has never disappeared. The Quran does not limit the concept of associating partners with Allah to physical idols alone. It addresses the deeper reality, the state of the heart, the direction of reliance, the source of fear and hope. Because worship in Islam is not only about bowing or prostrating, it is about where the heart turns when it seeks security, when it seeks provision, when it seeks protection. This is why the name Baal still appears in conversations today, not because people are openly rebuilding statues and returning to ancient rituals, but because the essence of what Baal represented continues to exist in different forms. The shapes have changed, the language has evolved, but the underlying issue remains. Human beings still have a tendency to attach themselves to things that feel powerful, things that appear to offer control, things that promise stability in an uncertain world. And when those attachments grow strong enough, they begin to take a place in the heart that belongs only to Allah. In earlier times, the illusion was visible. It stood in front of people in the form of carved idols, decorated and elevated, surrounded by rituals. Today, the illusion is often less visible, but no less real. It can take the form of wealth, where a person begins to believe that their security lies entirely in what they possess. It can take the form of status, where a person measures their worth and their future based on how they are seen by others. It can take the form of power, where control over people or situations becomes the ultimate goal. These things are not gods in the literal sense. But when they begin to dominate a person's decisions, when they become the source of ultimate trust or fear, they start to resemble the same pattern that once existed with Baal. Islam does not deny that these things exist or that they have a place in life. Wealth can be a blessing. Status can be a responsibility. Power can be a test. But the problem begins when they are elevated beyond their proper place, when they are treated as if they control outcomes independently of Allah, when the heart becomes attached to them in a way that overshadows reliance on the Creator. This is where the connection to the story of Baal becomes clear. It is not about the specific object of worship. It is about the shift in the heart, the redirection of trust. The Quran consistently calls people back to a state of clarity where reliance is placed fully on Allah, where everything else is seen for what it truly is, a means, not a source. It teaches that no matter how powerful something appears, it remains within the control of Allah. Nothing operates independently. Nothing can override His will. This perspective frees a person from the illusion of control that often leads to anxiety and misplaced dependence. It anchors the heart in something stable, something that does not change, something that does not fail. When you look back at the people of Baal through this lens, their situation becomes easier to understand, but also more unsettling. They were not simply misguided in a distant, irrelevant way. They were human beings responding to uncertainty, trying to secure their future, trying to explain the forces around them. But instead of turning to the one who truly controls those forces, they created something that gave them the illusion of control. And once that illusion took hold, it shaped everything else. The same risk exists in every generation. The details may differ, but the human tendency remains. People look for stability in a world that constantly shifts. They look for something they can hold on to, something they can depend on. And if that search is not guided by revelation, it can easily lead to misplaced trust. This is why the Quran brings these stories forward, not to criticize the past from a distance, but to bring the lesson into the present, to make it personal, to make it relevant. The name Baal becomes more than just a reference. It becomes a symbol, a reminder of how easily the heart can be redirected, how quickly truth can be overshadowed by familiarity, how powerful the pull of culture and habit can be. It also becomes a warning, a clear indication that falsehood, no matter how widespread, no matter how deeply rooted, remains false. It does not gain legitimacy through numbers or through time. It remains empty, even if it appears strong. At the same time, this is not a message of despair. It is a message of awareness and opportunity. Just as some people in the time of Prophet Ilyas recognized the truth and chose to follow it despite the pressure around them, the same choice is available in every era. The path of clarity is always there. The call to return to Allah is always present. The question that was asked then continues to echo, not as a distant voice, but as something that speaks directly to the present moment. Because in the end, the story is not really about Baal as a figure frozen in history. It is about what Baal represents, and whether that representation still finds a place in the way people think, the way they live, and the way they direct their hearts. It is about recognizing that the greatest danger is not always obvious. It is not always standing in front of us in the form of a statue. Sometimes it is hidden in priorities, in attachments, in assumptions that go unchallenged. And that is why the Quran brings this name forward, clear and direct, so that it is not forgotten, so that its lesson is not lost, so that every generation has the opportunity to reflect and ask itself the same question that was once asked to a people long ago, a question that remains just as relevant today as it was then. When you step back and look across the entire history of humanity through the lens of revelation, one pattern becomes unmistakably clear. The message brought by every prophet was not different in its foundation. It did not shift with time, culture, or geography. It remained consistent, firm, and uncompromising in its core. Worship Allah alone, without associating anything with Him. From the very first human being, Adam, peace be upon him, to Noah, who called his people for centuries, to Ibrahim, who stood against an entire society of idol worshippers, to Musa, who confronted tyranny, to Ilyas, who challenged the worship of Baal, and finally to Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, who delivered the final message to all of humanity. The call has always been the same. It is a call that does not bend to trends or adjust itself to fit what people want to hear. It is a call that aligns with truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. What makes this continuity so powerful is that it removes any excuse of confusion. Humanity was not left guessing. The same message was repeated, clarified, reinforced, and preserved. The details of laws may have differed, but the foundation never changed. This is why the story of Baal is not isolated. It is one example among many, a single thread in a much larger fabric that shows how often people drift away from this core message and how consistently they are called back to it. Each time deviation appeared, guidance followed. Each time falsehood spread, truth was sent to confront it. And yet, despite this repeated cycle, the response of people often followed the same pattern as well. There is something deeply revealing about how human beings respond to truth when it challenges what they are used to. It is not always a lack of understanding that leads to rejection. In many cases, the truth is recognized, at least on some level, but it is resisted because accepting it would require change. It would require letting go of something comfortable, something familiar, something that has become part of identity. This is where the real test lies. Not in hearing the message, but in responding to it. Not in recognizing the truth, but in submitting to it. The prophets did not come with messages that were easy to follow from a worldly perspective. They called people to shift their priorities, to realign their hearts, to detach from false dependencies, and to place their trust fully in Allah. This is not a small adjustment. It is a complete transformation of how a person sees the world. It affects how they make decisions, how they deal with fear, how they respond to loss, how they understand success. And because of this, many people hesitate. They delay. They look for ways to hold on to both the truth and their old attachments, even when those attachments contradict what they know is right. This is why the Quran does not only tell stories of belief, it also tells stories of rejection. Not to dwell on negativity, but to expose the patterns that lead people away from guidance. It shows how pride can block the path to truth, how arrogance can make a person feel that they do not need to change, how following the majority can create a false sense of security, and how attachment to tradition can override clear evidence. These are not ancient problems. They are present in every time, in every place, in different forms. When you consider this, the story of Baal begins to feel less distant and more immediate. It becomes a reflection, not of a forgotten past, but of a recurring reality. The names change, the forms evolve, but the underlying struggle remains. The call of the prophets continues to echo even after their time has passed, preserved in revelation, accessible to anyone who is willing to listen. And the question remains open, not as a historical inquiry, but as a personal one. What does a person truly rely on? Where does their sense of security come from? What do they turn to when everything else feels uncertain? This is where the Quran shifts the focus from external stories to internal reflection. It does not want a person to simply know about Baal. It wants them to understand what Baal represents and to examine whether that representation exists within their own life. Because the greatest danger is not always in what is obvious. It is often in what becomes normalized, what goes unquestioned, what quietly takes a central place in the heart without being recognized. A person may never stand in front of a statue or call upon a named idol, yet still place their ultimate trust in something created. They may believe that their future is entirely dependent on their wealth, their connections, their abilities, or their status. They may fear losing these things more than they fear losing their connection with Allah. They may make decisions that prioritize these things above what is right, above what is commanded. And in doing so, without realizing it, they begin to shift their reliance away from the one who truly controls everything. This is not said to create guilt without purpose. It is said to create awareness, because once a person becomes aware, they have the opportunity to correct their direction. Islam is not a message that traps people in their past. It is a message that opens the door to return, no matter how far a person has gone. The same Allah who warns about misguidance is the one who invites people back with mercy. with forgiveness, with the promise that no matter what has happened before, the path is always open for those who choose to return sincerely. This is the beauty of the final message brought by Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. It completes what came before it, preserves it, and makes it accessible in a way that is not limited to one nation or one time. The Quran remains unchanged, its message clear, its guidance direct. It continues to call people to the same truth that was spoken by every prophet before. It continues to challenge falsehood in whatever form it appears. It continues to remind people that what is temporary should not be treated as permanent, and what is created should not be elevated to the level of the Creator. And as you reach the end of this reflection, the story circles back to where it began, not with an ancient statue or a forgotten people, but with a question that remains alive. The people who once worshipped Baal are gone. Their temples have crumbled, their practices have faded, their names are no longer spoken as they once were. But the lesson they left behind has not disappeared. It has been preserved, protected, and passed down so that it can reach those who come after them. The question is no longer directed at them. It is directed at anyone who hears it now. Will you place your trust in what cannot truly benefit you, no matter how strong it appears? Or will you turn to the one who created you, who sustains you, who controls every outcome, even when it is not visible? This is not a question that demands a quick answer. It is a question that invites reflection, honesty, and ultimately a choice. Because in the end, everything else fades. Power fades, wealth fades, status fades, even the memory of entire civilizations fades. What remains is the truth, unchanged and unchallenged. What remains is the relationship between a person and their Creator. And what remains is the opportunity, while there is still time, to choose where that connection is placed.